Alright folks, one of my favorite lessons of the year. Reason being, it's not too bad. Hopefully everyone can catch on quickly. So I want to start with just a quick warm-up, and I would like you guys to either do this on the bottom of page 13, side of 13, on your desk with markers, I don't care. I just want you to take these two basic examples and solve. Okay? So if we look at the first one, we'll do this together. We are trying to solve just means get x by itself. So I need to get rid of all my layers. First layer being minus 9. Opposite of subtracting 9 is adding 9. And whether you use a calculator or your brain, we're doing some math here. 91 plus 9 is 100. And then if I want to get the x by itself, I need to get rid of this negative 4 out in here. Now careful, this is not subtracting 4. This is negative 4 times x. So to get rid of a negative 4 that is being multiplied, I simply need to divide. And 100 divided by negative 4 is negative 25. Okay. Go ahead, pause, do the same for the other one, and resume when you're done. I can do math. Alright, answer for this one should have gotten 32. Alright, now here's what I would like you to do. I would like to make the slightest change. Okay, look at the new example that I just gave you. Directions are going to be exactly the same. The directions are still going to be to solve. But first thing I want you to notice is what is different about it. What is different about these two examples compared to the first one? And hopefully you're all thinking, oh, you squared the x. And you're absolutely correct. Okay? So now what do you think is different about the process? Well, the answer to that question is we're just not done yet. So if you think back to the first example we did, the only change I made here is I made this x squared. And I made this x squared. So nothing is changing as far as the math goes. I'm still trying to get x by itself. I'm just not done yet. Because if I look, I still have a squared with the x. Okay, so then you just have to think about it. Well, what is the opposite of squaring something? And the opposite of squaring something is simply square rooting, and you are 100% correct. When I square root x squared, I get x, and now we get to remember our skills from outcome 3 component 1. If I square root a negative, that turns into I, and if I think about 25, well hey, 25 is one of our perfect squares. Square root of 25 is just 5. Okay, now that is not my only answer. I actually have two answers here. Because this was squared, that's one of the reasons. We're going to have two answers, and we'll talk about that next week. I have two answers because there are two numbers that multiply to 25. Let's just think about 25 right here, not negative 25. I can do 5 times 5 and get 25. But I also can do negative 5 times negative 5. And that also gets me 25. So moral of the story, whenever we complete the act of square rooting both sides, we're going to need two answers. A positive answer and a negative answer. Okay. And the same exact thing would have happened here. We still have a squared on that x, so I will need to square root. And now you're going to use a skill that you either just watched in the video or you learned last class. And that is break down 32. And that was one of the examples on there. Feel free to use your notes. When we broke down 32, we got 4 square root 2. Okay, so my answer on this one would have been x equals plus or minus 4 square root 2. Okay. That truly is the whole lesson. I'm going to go ahead and put this kind of into steps for you. So that way if you are stuck, this will help. So first example is very similar to what we just did on the last one. Okay. The other thing worth mentioning is, folks, what we're doing right now is called the square root property. I mention that because your directions will tell you that. It will ask you to solve using the square root property. Okay, it doesn't here, but it will on a test or a quiz. So here's how we can solve this. It truly means get x by itself. You're using all your normal solving techniques. So on my first example, if I'm trying to get x by itself, first I'm going to isolate the x squared. So I would do that by subtracting 3. Isolate means it's all alone. Now I need to get rid of the squared, and we just talked about if I want to get rid of a square, I will square root. I said when I square root both sides. That gives me a plus or minus. And now just apply your skills. Square root of 9 is 3. And because it was negative means our answer is going to have an I in it. Okay. Example 2 is more of the same. The only difference here is it looks a little different. It actually looks a lot different. And hopefully you're thinking, wow, Miss Winston, that looks a lot like vertex form. And I would say that is the smartest thing you've said all day. All right, goal doesn't change though. Since there's just one x, I can solve using the same way that I just did on this last problem. Starting with, I need to get rid of all my excess numbers. So the first number I need to get rid of is this minus 72. So I'm going to add 72. The next thing I need to get rid of now is this 2 out in front. And like we have discussed, if I have a 2 out in front, that means I am multiplying. I'm getting rid of it, folks. I cannot multiply here because that would be breaking order of operations. Exponents comes before multiplication. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to get rid of it by dividing. 72 divided by 2 is 36. You may use your calculators if you didn't know that. Okay, and that was our step 1. Get that parentheses x squared by itself. Step 2, get rid of the squared. And when I square root 36, I get positive 6 and negative 6. And I'm almost done. Okay, last step is really to get x by itself. All right. So since this worked out nicely, since 36 was a perfect square, I'm going to have 2 answers here with from two different equations. My first equation is for the x being positive 6, and my second equation is for when x was negative 6. And now I'm going to solve like I normally would. If I want to get rid of minus 3, I'm going to add 3. And I get 9, and negative 6 plus 3 is negative 3. Oops, sorry about that. And that's your final answer. Okay. If you would like to do one more, I am going to do one more on page 14. I'm going to do a fraction one. I think there's a fraction one on here. If you feel content, then go ahead and do page 14, and then check your answers with the answer key. Okay. Yeah, this is a great one. Alrighty, so first thing, get rid of the 21. I can do that by subtracting. Negative 4 minus 21 is negative 25. Okay. Now to get rid of the 1/2, I can divide it. The other way that you can think of this is, we've talked about this before. The fact that this is 1/2, this simply means we are dividing by 2. Multiplying by 1/2 is the same as dividing by 2. So think about, how can I get rid of dividing by 2? And the answer is multiplying by 2. So I prefer, instead of dividing it by 1/2, I prefer to multiply by 2. And that's going to make my 2 and my 1/2 go away. I would do the same on the other side, and negative 25 times 2 is negative 50. Okay. To get rid of my squared, I just have to square root. Now 50 is not a perfect square, so that means I'm going to have to do a factor tree, which I probably should have left myself more room. 50 is 25 and 2, and then 25 is 5 and 5. Yeah, I had bad spacing. So I have a pair of 5s. So the 5 gets to go on the outside of the square root. The 2 is left on the inside. And once again, because I had a negative, that means I need an I. Alright folks, that should be enough for you. Go ahead, pause, practice the rest of this page.